Okay guys, so today I'm gonna show you how you can get super smooth, epic cinematic gimbal shots without using slow motion. Super smooth, epic Too much? Nah. Okay, now before we go out, a few important things. First of all, always make sure that your gimbal is perfectly balanced so that the motors don't have to work more than necessary. But also, when I first used this gimbal, I did balance it, but I forgot to balance the tilt axis. And what happened is that for some movements, the motors really started to struggle and vibrate. And that was with my Canon M50, so a really light camera. Make sure that all the axes are balanced and balanced perfectly. Your gimbal will thank you a few years down the road. And then also, just read the manual so that you know what all the buttons do and where all the settings are, because the first few times I didn't know how to reset the axis and I had to turn it off and on all the time. I looked really stupid, it was annoying, and the solution was simple. Just read the damn manual. But okay, now let's go out and shoot some stuff. The first tip is pretty simple but not so obvious, and it has to do with how you hold the gimbal, because this gimbal is designed to be held like this. You know, the buttons and the joystick are right here, so most people hold it like this. But the problem is then when you tilt it left or right away you start feeling the weight of the camera and the motors. So I find it a lot more comfortable when I put this hand all the way up here, as close as possible to the camera, and then this hand all the way down here. This gives me a lot more control, it's more comfortable and less straining on my arm muscles. Maybe I need to train a little bit more, but yeah, this is how I do it and it's a lot more comfortable. Did you see just how smooth that was? I'm walking on uneven terrain, backward, and it looks super smooth. There's no bounce in the shot, you know, that you sometimes get when walking with a gimbal. And remember, I'm shooting in 24 frames per second, so there's also no slow motion to smoothen out some of the bumps and shakes. But I do have to say, the stabilization of my Sony a7S III, it did help me out here. But I remember the first times that I used this gimbal, I always had that little bounce in my shots because I was holding it down here instead of up here where it's a lot more comfortable. And I also stretched my arms way too much. That's another tip. If you don't have to stretch your arms, just hold them close to your body because it's a lot easier to carry the weight and you'll get steadier shots. But it's not only the grip that's important, also how you walk. Most of you probably know that you have to walk as smoothly as possible. You know, heel to toe, the ninja walk. And that's also to eliminate that bouncy movement in your shots. But there's more, and that brings us to the next tip. Okay, so you have to walk as smoothly as possible, and as you just saw, it's possible to get great shots while walking backwards. But obviously, it's a lot easier when you're walking forward. The more comfortable you are while walking, the smoother your shots will be. And that's why, whenever it's possible, I use my flip out screen and walk forward. Let me give you an example. Let's say I want to do a profile shot walking next to the subject. So I'm walking that way, the subject is right here, so the camera is pointing that way. Now, without a flip out screen, it's really difficult to see the screen to frame your shot. The only way to do it is to hold your gimbal here and then walk sideways. Or maybe you can walk forward and turn your head this way, but then you can't see where you're going. So there's no comfortable way to look at the screen and walk forward at the same time. Now, with a flip out screen, that changes the whole game. Because what I do now is, I point the camera that way, I flip out the screen, and I can hold the gimbal in front of me, walk forward while the subject is walking here next to me. And you just feel a lot more confident when you do it like this, because you can walk forward, you can see where you're going, but at the same time you can look at the screen and frame your subject. Perfect. This is what it looks like. Then we have foregrounds and parallax. Foregrounds is pretty simple. Try to have something in the foreground of your shot to make it look more dynamic. And parallax is a little bit different. It's when you have your subject and then the background move at different speeds. It looks really cool, and the easiest way to get it is with a longer focal length and by doing an orbit shot. But also with a 35mm it's possible to get a cool parallax effect. I think this is one of the most difficult things when it comes to gimbal shots, because I really like slow movements, slow gimbal shots. Now, when you're following a subject, for example, and they all of a sudden change direction, you don't want to react with a fast, jerky movement, because then you'll mess up that slow gimbal shot. And also your composition. What you actually need to do is start moving the gimbal and the camera at the same time as your subject, or even a second before, so that you can keep a nice composition and a slow movement. Now, that means that when you're filming random things, when nothing's planned, it's all about anticipation. Try to predict what your subject will do. And that's not the easiest thing to do. But when it's not random, then just plan out your shots, communicate. Talk to your subject so that you know what will happen during the shot. And also during the shot, when you're not recording sound, you can talk to your subject and say, now move to the right. Okay, and start going to the right. And then you know exactly what to do with the camera, the gimbal, to keep a nice composition and a slow movement. And finally, there's frame rate. Now look, when you shoot in 60 or 120 frames per second slow motion, it's easy to, well, easy. It's easier to get really smooth shots, even handheld. But it's slow motion, so what if you don't want slow motion? Well, the power of a gimbal really shows when you have to shoot real-time footage. And most of the time I shoot in 24 frames per second because I think it's the most cinematic frame rate. You don't have to agree with that, that's fine. But there's also an in-between you can do. Because for some projects, it looks really nice to shoot in 30 frames per second and then slow it down to 80%. And then your footage will feel slightly surreal, but it won't look surreal. Does that make sense? What I mean is that the viewer won't notice necessarily that it's slowed down, but they'll feel like it's a bit more dreamy. Especially when you're shooting lifestyle or a commercial, music video, travel, 30 frames per second, slowed down to 80% looks really nice. Of course, you can't have people talking, or at least hear them talk, because you can't slow down the sound, blah blah blah. But anyway, next time you're watching TV and there's a commercial on, and it's like a good vibe commercial with people talking, having a good time, but you can't hear them talking, take a good look, because chances are that it's recorded in 30 frames per second, slowed down to 80%. And most people don't notice it right away. So it looks like real-time footage, but it isn't. So another advantage that you get is that it will smoothen out some of the little bumps and shakes that you sometimes get when using a gimbal. Perfect. And that's it, guys. Those are the 5 tips and techniques that helped me the most when using a gimbal. I hope you found this video useful. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, of course. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.